Hello, my name is Ron. I'm the instructor today for Discovery class. One of the most important questions that you're going to answer in your lifetime was asked by one that I'm going to talk about today. Here's the question. What should I do with Jesus, the one that's called the Christ? That question was asked in Matthew 27, verse 22. That question came from the lips of Pontius Pilate. He's the one I want to talk about today. So sit back, pour yourself another juice or a coffee, and listen in. You're about to sit into one of the most famous public trials that history has ever presented. It involves two men. One, he's a Roman. The other, he's a Jew. The Roman's name is Pontius Pilate. He was they call him a procurator of Judea, which was a Roman province in the vast Roman Empire. His boss was Caesar Tiberius, the emperor of Rome. We would probably understand this man Pilate better if you're an American and you'd say, well, he was a governor over one of the states under the president. Or as a Canadian, we would consider Pilate a premier in one of our provinces under our prime minister. Anyway, that's who he was. The Jew, his name was Jesus. He was called the Christ. He was a carpenter's son from Nazareth. He called himself the Son of God. He had around him 12 men, and they were called his disciples. For 3 years, this Jew traveled the length and the breadth of Judea, teaching, healing, performing miracles, saying he was one day going to die, but on the third day he was going to rise again. And in those years of ministry, many people followed him. All this comes to a head. Jesus is arrested. He's brought to trial. He's about to be sentenced. Here's where my story begins. The courtroom is part of a fortress. It's in the center of ancient Jerusalem. Everything in that fortress is made of white stone and marble. Very ornate. The staircases are marble. The banisters, the polished marble floors, some of them mosaic, some of them broad, smooth, slabs of stone 3 and 4 feet square. Pilate the judge is a short man. He wears a white, expensive toga. It's been imported from the East. His hair is trimmed short. He has a beardless face, as did all the Romans. Caesars, senators, procurators, they all had that. None of them had beards. On the other hand, here we have a prisoner. He has a bearded face, long flowing locks of hair. Pilate looks at this lone figure. He's all by himself. There he stands. His feet are swollen and they're muddy. He looks like a laborer. He doesn't look like a teacher. He certainly doesn't have the appearance of a troublemaker. Pilate the judge, in this case, he looks a bit apprehensive. As a matter of fact, if you stare at Pilate, he looks a bit nervous. it would appear that he's been thrust into a position that he'd rather like to avoid. From the top of the staircase, two soldiers make their way down. They're dressed in short togas. They lead the prisoner and set him up before Pilate. Pilate is seated on a royal throne, very regal. Armchairs, railings made of ivory, placed on a landing platform that looks to be about 3 or 4 feet above the floor. The courtroom is lined with other soldiers. They're all around the outside skirting. They're dressed in battle dress, spears erect, staring straight ahead. The magistrate, who is Pilate, he enters and he begins to ascend the steps, and there he's seated. The accused, Jesus, called the Christ, he's brought before him, and he stands alone. His head is bowed. His eyes are staring downward. Behind this procession, a large group of religious leaders, robed in fine white linen, down to the floor, decorated in lavish threads and baubles. They walk over to one side of the room and they stand facing Pilate and the prisoner. So you got the picture? Jewish leaders on one side of the room, Roman soldiers lining the other side, and there in the middle, up on a platform, sits Pilate, and there standing in the room all by himself is this prisoner. Pilate stands and he looks at Jesus. The prisoner gazes up at Pilate. The prisoner looks doleful. His face is bruised. One of his eyes is swollen. His forehead is matted with blood. His arms and his thighs, they've been streaked by lashing. It's obvious that this man in front of Pilate has been beaten. A soldier beside Jesus asked Pilate if he wanted to have the prisoner's garment removed so he could see his whole body. Pilate shakes his head and he says, no, that's not necessary. Leave the man standing as he is. Pilate would never have considered seeing this case. But it had to do with religion. It had to do with Jewish authority. It had to do with revolt. It had to do with taxes. And ultimately, it had to do with Caesar himself. If this case were not handled properly, there's going to be civil unrest, and there's probably going to be a revolt. Then coming from Pilate's lips, these words, "Guard, is this man here a rabble-rouser that I've been asked to try?" He says, asking the soldier who brought in Jesus. "Yes," replied the guard, "this is the Christ." Pilate then shifts in his seat and he stares at Jesus. Now he presses Jesus further, staring at him and questioning him with, "Are you the King of the Jews?" Gently, Jesus raises his head with his eyes looking into Pilate's eyes. He says, "Those are your words." When the Jewish leaders hear these words from the lips of Christ, They began to sneer, and they began to yell, and they began to stare at the accused from their side of the room. They began to shout, "He stirs the people. Didn't you hear what he said? He claims to be king. He's going to make a mockery out of this court. You watch what happens here." Pilate listens to all these threats from the side of the room, from the Jewish Sanhedrin. But Pilate pays no attention to those railings. Instead, he focuses on Jesus, the prisoner, the accused, the man beaten, the man standing before him. But he notices something. He notices how calm this man is. He also notices that he makes no defense. He doesn't explain anything. There's no panic in his voice. He's a perfect gentleman. He even looks at Pilate with a gentle smile. He's even convincing. He seems so full of confidence. And he even has a bit of a touch of forgiveness. There's just something about that Galilean that Pilate is staring at that appeals to him. He just seems different. He isn't what Pilate expected to face at all. He looks across at the chest-length beards of these Jewish leaders, shouting their rage, wild animals almost, angry, boasting about their sovereign God, acting like fiery zealots. This Jesus, standing before him, isn't like them at all. Pilate even wishes that he could have such self-control that he's looking at himself. Pilate thinks to himself, this man isn't a criminal. Children even like him. He was told that children like him. Now he can see why. He was told that he fed the crowds. Over there in Bethany, just 5 miles away, he raised a man from the dead. Someone from Herod's crowd had told him that. They wanted to make him king. Come to think of it, he'd make a great king, thinks Pilate. We could use a king like that around here. He'd be head over heels. Better than anything that these Jewish leaders are giving him. Shouting and roaring accusations against this man. All the power of Rome could not quell, however, the seething anger that was now brewing inside this Jewish state. Pilate looks into the face of these Jewish elders standing before him. He could tell that just lashing Jesus with whip and putting a crown of thorns on his head, that wasn't enough. That isn't going to satisfy them. They wanted more. What more would they want with this man, he thinks. They mocked him. Isn't that enough? I've had him lashed. My professional soldiers have done a good job on that. Look at them. What more do they want? You're killing your own prophet, said Pilate. Is that what you want? Pilate, looking down into the face of Jesus, thinks, I'm going to set this man free. I'm not going to try him. He's an innocent man. As he's thinking these thoughts, he's interrupted by a tap on the shoulder. A messenger hands him a note. He reads it. The words on the parchment are the words of his wife. Pilate's wife had a dream, and in the dream she was told that Jesus was an innocent man. Trust me. Don't try this man. Set him free. Let him go. Having read the note, Pilate says to Jesus, and seems the Roman gods are on your side. My wife says that you're okay. She says that you're not what they're yelling, all these Jewish people screaming. You're not that at all. Now Pilate has a problem. He has to make a decision. He leans forward on his thick marble throne with its ornate, thick legs. He must now render something that'll satisfy the hungry mob as well as satisfy his own conscience, as well as satisfy his wife. He's never faced anything like that before. He heard cases in this courtroom before, hundreds of them. He's heard them sitting right where this man was, in the same chair he would be seated. He had to make a decision. Every trial had a story. How many pleas he heard. The accused standing there, staring at him, pleading for mercy, begging for acquittal, begging to be set free. Now, he's staring at Jesus, the Nazarene. He stands there. Jesus is calm. Quietly stands in silence. He's not screaming. He's not running away. He's not shifty. He's not even afraid, nor is he angry. He's not surprised. He seems to know his hour, and he knows that his hour has now come. At least that's what I see, says Pilate. This has to be one of the strangest moments in this Roman ruler's life, even in this Jewish state. He's the leader, but standing before him is a greater leader. But where are his followers? Why are these Jewish Sanhedrin standing here? Aren't they his followers? They can't be, not saying what I'm hearing. If he's the Messiah, then what is his intent? If he's this great teacher, this great rabbi, why are these religious big shots so angry at him? Then comes to Pilate's mind this question. What should I do with this Jesus, the one that is called the Christ? Has that question ever come to your mind? What should I do with Jesus, the one called the Christ? Have you ever thought of that? Most of you listening know more about this Jesus than Pilate did. You know his claims. You heard his stories. You've sung his hymns. You've given your gifts to the church. Your mother taught you all about him since you were a little child. You know all about this Jesus. You might have even used his name in vain. You know who he is. Pilate's question, what will I do with this man? Well, it's your question too. Now, you can do two things. One, you can reject him. Many have. The idea of God becoming a man, nonsense. and you walk away. Or two, you can accept him. You can go on a journey with him. You can listen to his voice, and you can follow him. Pilate could have, but he didn't. 4 times he tried to free Jesus, and 4 times he failed. 1, he tried to give the people Barabbas, but the crowd wanted Jesus dead. 2, he sends Jesus to be whipped, and the crowd wants Christ sent to Golgotha. 3, he tells the people, I find nothing wrong with this man, and the crowd accuses Pilate of violating the law. And 4, on his final, the release failed. The Jews accused him of betraying Caesar. Pilate thought he could avoid making the choice. He washed his hands in public. Rather than receiving God's grace, he chose a bull. Rather than asking Jesus to stay, he sends him away. Rather than hearing Jesus' voice, Pilate hears the voice of the people. After Christ died on the cross, Jesus' followers did amazing things. Here's one of them. In the city of Rome, in that first century, Christians were martyred. To save their lives, they went into hiding, many of them. One of their hiding places in Rome was in the Catacombs, under the city. The Catacombs, they were man-made tunnels under the city, going down hundreds of feet. Scholars tell us that there could be up to as many as 90 miles of tunnels underneath the city of Rome, called catacombs. And these catacombs were really cemeteries. They were long shafts, like coal mines, dug out of the sandstone, and it was there they buried their dead. New Christians lived down there to hide from the Roman soldiers. Soldiers didn't follow the Christians down there because the tunnels were booby-trapped, and soldiers would die. So nobody went down there, they were left alone. But those early Christians had a Latin motto. Here's their motto: non nobis solum, not for us alone. The religion above ground in Rome in that first century was pagan. They worshipped idols. They ultimately worshipped Caesar. Worst of all, they sacrificed their children to idols. Here's what they would do. When a little baby was born, the mother would wrap the child in a little blanket in the color of the idol to which it was being sacrificed. And at night, when the sun went down, and the mother would place the baby at the designated spot by the side of the road, where an offering could be received for that particular idol. And during that night, Roman legionnaires, soldiers of Caesar, they would come by in carts and spears, and they would kill that little child with their instruments, and they would burn that child as a sacrifice. Knowing the wickedness of the state, those early Christians would do the following. Remember, their motto was non nobis solum, not for us alone. We're not doing this for us. The early Christians would come out of their catacombs where they were hiding in the dead of the night, and they would prowl the streets of Rome. And they'd listen for a cry or maybe a whimper from a little child. When they would hear it, they would come before the soldiers got there or the carts arrived, and they would take that child back to where they came from, down into the catacombs. And they would place that child into the arms and the safety of a nursing mother. And those early Christians had many wet nurses down there in the catacombs, waiting for those words, non nobis solum, not for us alone. Here is going to be a child that we're going to see as a gift from God, and it's going to live. And that's what they did. Those early Christians. But when that child grew down there in that little catacomb, they would take that child, if the child wanted to now, it could be a teenager. It would tell them where they were found. They would tell that child where that child was loved and where its mother dropped him off. And if they wanted to go back to that life, that child would be free to do so, because their motto was not for us alone, non nobis solum. That child could be set free. We're going to give it back to where he came from. I began this lesson by questioning, what should I do with Jesus, the one called the Christ? I end our class with what those early Christians answered that question. Non nobis solum, not for us alone. That Jesus that you have accepted isn't just for you. You have to share him. When those early Christians hid down in the mines and they came out, they did it as a gift to God to save a life. Well, what should I do with Jesus, the one that's called the Christ? I suggest you give him away. Share him with someone else. He just doesn't belong to you. The Great Commission says, go ye into all the world, preach the gospel, and share this non nobis solum, not for us alone, with someone else. Well, the time on the wall is gone. I'm going to close with a little note from the sunny side of the street. I like to close my class with a smile on your face. And here's one. A fourth grader was asked by his teacher to write a little story, what they did over Christmas. Here are his words. He told of the grandparents, they had moved to a retirement home in a mobile park. This is what he wrote. Grandma and Grandpa used to live here in a big red brick house. But Grandpa, he got retarded. And they moved to tin huts, side by side. They live in a place where there are lots of retarded people. They ride three-wheel bicycles now. They go to a big building that's called a rec hall. There they play games and do exercises, but they don't do it very good. There's a swimming pool, but they don't swim. They just stand there in the water with their hats on. When you come into the park, there's a little dollhouse with a man sitting in it, and he watches all day long. Everyone wears badges with their names on them. I guess they don't know who they are. My grandma says that Grandpa, he worked hard all his life and earned his retardedment. I wish they'd moved back. But I guess the man in the dollhouse, he won't let them out. See you next week, class. So good of you to come by today.